Grace's phone buzzed once on the nightstand and went dark again. She didn't stir. She was too deep in the kind of sleep that only comes the night before a wedding, when the body finally surrenders after weeks of running on adrenaline and list. Down the hallway, past the room where her gown hung zipped inside its garment bag, a light was still on. Patricia sat at the dining table with her laptop open, and Vanessa stood behind her chair, arms folded, watching the screen like it owed her something. "Are you sure this works?" Vanessa whispered. "It's her email," Patricia said. "I've had access to it for months." She never changed the recovery number after she lost that old phone. Vanessa leaned closer. "So we just cancel everything?" "Everything," Patricia said. Her fingers moved fast, practiced. "The venue first. Then the caterer. Then the photographer. By the time she wakes up, none of it will exist. And if she calls them to confirm?" Patricia smiled, and it was not a warm smile. "She won't need to call anyone. I'm sending the cancellation from her own account." As far as any of them will know, the bride changed her mind herself. Vanessa laughed under her breath, a short, ugly sound. "Let's see her walk down an aisle that doesn't exist." Neither of them looked toward the hallway. Neither of them thought, even for a second, about the woman sleeping 20 feet away who had spent 11 months building the life she was about to cancel with a few keystrokes. Patricia hit send on the last email, closed the laptop, and exhaled like she'd just finished something ordinary. A chore. Nothing more. "Get some sleep," she told her daughter. "Tomorrow is going to be a long day." Neither of them could have known, not really, what tomorrow would cost. To understand how a mother could do something like this to her own daughter, you have to go back almost 30 years, to a version of Patricia Bennett who cried herself to sleep more nights than she ever admitted to anyone. She and Richard had been married 4 years before they even considered that something might be wrong. They were the kind of couple people described as made for each other, Richard steady and quiet, Patricia sharp and funny, both of them working their way up in a Lagos that was still becoming the city it would eventually be. They wanted children the way people want oxygen, without ever having to think about it, until the wanting became the only thing they could think about. 2 years of trying turned into 4. 4 turned into 6. They visited fertility specialists in Lagos, then one in Abuja a cousin had recommended, then finally a clinic that promised the newest procedures money could buy. Richard remembered sitting in a waiting room so many times that he knew the pattern of the ceiling tiles by heart. "There's nothing wrong with either of you medically," one doctor told them, not unkindly, but with the detachment of someone who had said the same sentence to 100 other couples. "Sometimes it simply doesn't happen the way we expect." "So what do we do?" Patricia had asked, her voice cracking in a way she hated. "You keep trying. Or you consider other options." The other options conversation happened on a Tuesday evening, at their dining table, the same table where years later she would sit and destroy her daughter's wedding. Richard held her hand while she cried. "I can't keep doing this, Richard," she said. "Every baby shower. Every christening. Every auntie asking when it's my turn. I smile and I say soon, and inside I am dying a little more each time." "Then let's stop trying the way we've been trying," Richard said gently. "There's a program at the fertility center. Embryo donation, or IVF with donor material if we need it. We don't have to keep doing this to ourselves." Patricia looked at him like he'd handed her a life raft. "You'd be okay with that? A child that isn't fully ours?" "Patricia," Richard said, and his voice was firm in a way she rarely heard from him. "A child we raise, who calls us mother and father, who we love every single day of her life, that child will be fully ours. I promise you that." She believed him. She wanted so badly to believe him. What neither of them knew, what no one would know for years, was that the clinic they trusted had made an error so quiet it left no trace anyone noticed at the time. A mislabeled sample. A transfer meant for one couple's genetic material that instead carried another's. When Patricia gave birth 9 months later to a healthy baby girl, there was nothing to suggest anything had gone wrong. The paperwork said what it said. The joy in that delivery room was real and enormous and complete. They named her Grace. "She's perfect," Richard whispered, holding his daughter for the first time, tears cutting clean lines down his face. "Patricia, look at her. She's perfect." Patricia looked at the tiny, wrinkled, furious-faced infant in her husband's arms and felt something in her chest unknown for the first time in 6 years. "She's ours," she said. "Finally. She's ours." Grace's arrival changed the house in ways that felt almost too good to be believable. Richard's small property development firm, which had been stagnant for 2 years, suddenly began landing contracts it had no business landing. A government tender came through. An investor who had ignored 3 previous pitches called out of nowhere wanting to meet. Richard, only half joking, started calling Grace his good luck charm. "This girl brought fortune into this house," he told Patricia one night, watching Grace sleep in her crib. "I mean it. Since she came, everything has changed for us." For a while, it truly seemed that way. Laughter filled the house again. Patricia stopped dreading family gatherings. She held her daughter and felt, for the first time in years, like a whole woman. Then, when Grace was almost 3, Patricia missed her period. She assumed stress. She assumed anything except the truth, because the truth had stopped feeling possible years ago. When the test came back positive, she sat on the bathroom floor and cried so hard Richard thought something terrible had happened. Patricia, what's wrong?" He burst through the door and found her holding the little plastic stick with both hands like it might shatter. "I'm pregnant," she said, staring at him in disbelief. "Richard, I'm pregnant." He lifted her clean off the floor, laughing and crying at the same time. "After everything, after all these years." "After all these years," she repeated, and for a moment the two of them just held each other in the small bathroom, overwhelmed by a joy they had stopped allowing themselves to hope for. 9 months later, Vanessa was born. Richard stood in the hospital room holding his newborn daughter, with 3-year-old Grace clinging to his leg, and said the words that felt, at the time, like the happiest sentence of his life. "Now we have 2 daughters. Our family is complete." For a while, it was. Patricia loved both girls fiercely in those early years, doting on Grace with the same intensity she showered on Vanessa. But something shifted as the girls grew, something so gradual that Patricia herself probably couldn't have named the exact day it began. It wasn't jealousy over affection, not at first. It was something quieter and, in some ways, crueler. It was watching Grace become extraordinary at everything she touched, while Vanessa struggled to be ordinary at most things, and feeling that difference as a personal referendum on her own motherhood. By the time Grace was 19, she was already assisting on real interior design commissions, invited into rooms full of professionals twice her age who listened when she spoke. Vanessa, at 17, was coasting through a diploma program she showed no real interest in finishing. "You should see the way that girl talks to clients," Patricia overheard a family friend say at a gathering, nodding toward Grace across the room. "Sharpest eye in Lagos, I'm telling you. That child is going to be somebody." Patricia smiled the way she trained herself to smile, and something inside her hardened just a little more. That night, after the guests left, Vanessa stormed into her room and slammed the door hard enough to rattle the frame. Patricia followed her in. "What's wrong with you?" Patricia asked. "Did you hear them?" Vanessa's voice cracked with fury. "All night. Grace this, Grace that. Nobody said one thing about me the entire evening. Am I invisible in my own house?" Patricia sat on the edge of the bed and, instead of correcting her daughter, instead of reminding her that praise wasn't something you could steal from someone else, she said, "People don't see your worth the way they should. They act like she's better than me," Vanessa spat. Patricia's jaw tightened. "You are not less than anyone. Especially not Grace." But the truth Patricia never said out loud was that some nights, lying awake next to Richard, she wondered the same bitter thing her daughter wondered: why did everything come so easily to Grace? Why did the girl who wasn't even supposed to exist in their lives outshine the daughter Patricia had bled and prayed and waited 6 years for? Richard noticed the shift long before it cuddled into anything dangerous. One evening he sat beside his wife on the veranda and said, carefully, "Patricia, you're treating the girls differently." "What do you mean?" Her voice went cold immediately. "I mean exactly what I said. Grace notices it. I notice it. You give Vanessa everything and you give Grace criticism." Patricia's arms crossed over her chest, a wall going up in real time. "Vanessa is my daughter." Richard stared at her, stunned into silence for a moment. "And what is Grace?" Patricia looked away and said nothing, and that silence told Richard more than any answer could have. Grace felt it too, of course, though for years she couldn't put language to what she felt. She noticed the way her mother's praise for her always came with a qualifier: good, but you could have done more. She noticed how Vanessa's mistakes dissolved into nothing while her own were catalogued and remembered. One evening, after watching Vanessa receive an expensive bag just because, Grace found her father alone in his study. "Daddy," she said softly, "can I ask you something?" "Anything, sweetheart." "Do you think Mom loves me the way she loves Vanessa?" The question landed in Richard's chest like a stone. He pulled his daughter into a hug before she could see his face crumble. "Never think that, Grace. You are my daughter, and I love you more than you will ever know." Grace nodded against his shoulder, but the question didn't disappear. It simply went quiet, tucked away somewhere she revisited on the hardest nights. Grace grew into a woman people described, almost without exception, as remarkable. Not just talented, kind. She remembered the names of the security guards at every building she walked in. She tipped generously and thanked people sincerely. Clients requested her by name and then found themselves, weeks into a project, telling her things about their marriages and their grief that they hadn't told their own friends, because something about the way she listened made people feel safe. Vanessa, in contrast, had absorbed every indulgence Patricia offered and turned it into a personality. She expected doors to open because she walked toward them. When a professor once corrected her walk in front of the class, she stormed out and called her mother in tears, and Patricia had shown up at the school the next day to complain. "My daughter has done nothing wrong," Patricia told the confused administrator, while Vanessa smirked behind her. The pattern repeated so many times that Vanessa stopped believing she was ever capable of being wrong, and the word's occasional insistence that she was became, in her mind, evidence of conspiracy rather than consequence. It was Daniel Foster who changed everything, though neither he nor Grace realized it at the time. He owned a small but growing chain of boutique hotels across Lagos, and he had hired Grace's design firm to overhaul the lobby and guest floors of his flagship property in Victoria Island. Their first real conversation happened at 11 at night, both of them still at the site after everyone else had gone home, staring at floor plans spread across a folding table. "You're going to tell me the marble I picked is wrong, aren't you?" Daniel said, only half joking. Grace tilted her head, studying the samples. "It's not wrong. It's just not you. This hotel is warm. It's personal. You greet guests by name. This marble says corporate bank lobby." Daniel laughed, surprised. "Nobody's ever told me my hotel has a personality before." "Everything has a personality," Grace said. "Most people just don't bother to notice it." He noticed her that night, not just her eye for design, but the calm certainty in the way she spoke, like she trusted her own judgment completely and had no need to perform confidence she didn't feel. Over the following weeks, their late meetings became something neither of them labeled out loud but both of them looked forward to. When a shipment of custom furniture arrived damaged and the vendor tried to dodge responsibility, Grace handled the entire dispute over the phone with such composed authority that Daniel, standing beside her, felt something settle in his chest that had nothing to do with furniture. "Do you know something?" he asked her one evening, after the site had gone quiet. "What?" Every day I spend with you convinces me you're different from anyone I've met. Grace looked down, a smile tugging at her mouth. Different how? You have a good heart, Daniel said simply. That's rare. Rarer than people think. Their relationship deepened quickly after that, built on the kind of respect that doesn't announce itself but shows up in small, consistent ways, him remembering she took her tea with too much sugar, her noticing when he was quietly stressed about a business decision before he said a word. Within a year, Daniel had made up his mind. He wanted to marry her. He came to the Bennett house to speak with Richard properly, sitting stiffly in the good chairs in the good sitting room, and Richard listened to him talk about Grace with an openness that told him everything he needed to know. You have my blessing, Richard said, extending his hand. All I've ever wanted is to see my daughter happy. Daniel shook his hand firmly. Thank you, sir. I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure of that. But in the kitchen, where Patricia and Vanessa had been listening through the doorway, something far colder was taking root. Did you see the way he looked at her? Vanessa hissed once Daniel had left. Like she hung the moon. Why does she always get everything? Patricia was quiet for a long moment, staring at nothing. Life is not fair, she finally said, and the words came out flat, resigned, dangerous. Wedding planning consumed the following months. Relatives called with congratulations. Friends offered to help with everything from decor to guest list. Daniel, determined to make Grace feel like the center of the universe, handled arrangements with the same meticulous care he brought to his hotels. Nothing was too small to get right. Every gesture from him, every gift, every small kindness, landed in Vanessa's chest like an accusation. He bought her a car, Vanessa said one night, scrolling through photos Grace had posted. An actual car. As an engagement gift. What have I ever gotten from anyone? Patricia sat across from her, saying nothing, letting the silence do the encouraging her words no longer needed to. Days before the wedding, the pressure inside Vanessa reached a breaking point. She sat in her room crying, and when Patricia came in and asked what was wrong, everything came pouring out. Everything is wrong, Vanessa said. My whole life has been unfair. Grace gets everything. Everyone praises her, everyone loves her, and now she's marrying a man like Daniel while I have nothing. Patricia sat beside her daughter, and for a moment, a better version of herself might have said something true, that jealousy destroys the person who carries it, that Vanessa's worth wasn't a competition she was losing. Instead, she said, "You're right." Vanessa looked up, startled. What? You're right, Patricia repeated, quiet and certain. Sometimes life has not been fair to you. Ever since Grace entered this family, everything has revolved around her. So you see it too, Vanessa whispered. I've seen it for years, Patricia said. The conversation stretched late into the night, mother and daughter feeding each other's bitterness until it calcified into something they could no longer talk themselves out of. Neither one said the idea out loud at first. It sat between them, unspoken, until Vanessa finally broke the silence. What if the wedding just doesn't happen? Patricia looked at her daughter for a long time. If there's no wedding, she said slowly, there's no marriage. Exactly, Vanessa breathed. A dangerous kind of resolve settled over both of them. By the time the night ended, they had made their decision, and it wasn't the decision of two rational women, it was the decision of two people who had spent years convincing themselves that someone else's happiness was the reason for their own unhappiness, and who could no longer see any other way through it. The digital sabotage was Vanessa's idea, refined by Patricia's patience. Vanessa had lifted Grace's old email password months earlier, back when Grace briefly asked her to help transfer some files, never imagining her sister would keep it. The night before the wedding, they used it to systematically dismantle everything Grace had built. Venue, cancelled. Caterer, cancelled. Photographer, cancelled. Each cancellation email written in Grace's own voice, apologetic and vague, something has come up, I'm so sorry for the short notice. Are you sure this works? Vanessa asked again, watching Patricia's fingers move across the keyboard. She won't need to call anyone to confirm, Patricia said. As far as they'll ever know, the bride cancelled it herself. By morning, an entire wedding had been erased in the dark, quietly, without a single flame or a single sound loud enough to wake the woman it belonged to. Grace woke at 7, stretching with the particular lightness of someone who believes today is the best day of her life. She reached for her phone out of habit and frowned. It was dead, though she was certain she charged it. She plugged it in and went to shower, humming, running through the day's schedule in her mind. Hair at 9. Makeup at 10. Venue setup check at 11. When her phone finally powered back on, it exploded with notifications. Missed calls. Furious text from her wedding planner. A voicemail from the venue coordinator asking why she'd cancelled with less than 12 hours notice. Another from the caterer. Another, this one strange and cold, from a number she didn't recognize, Daniel's mother, her voice tight with barely restrained anger, saying something about serious concerns and we need to talk before anything moves forward. What is happening? Grace whispered to her empty room, scrolling with shaking hands. What is going on? She called the venue first. The coordinator picked up, clearly relieved. Oh, thank goodness, I got your cancellation email last night. I wasn't sure if dash. I didn't send a cancellation, Grace said, her voice climbing. I never cancelled anything. But it came from your email. This morning at 2 a.m. Grace's stomach dropped through the floor. She hadn't been awake at 2 a.m. She'd been asleep, exactly where she was supposed to be, dreaming about a day that was now unraveling in real time. She burst into the hallway still in her robe, hair half dried, and found Richard in the kitchen. Daddy, someone cancelled my wedding. All of it. The venue, the caterer, everything, and it came from my email, and I don't understand. Richard's face went through several emotions in the span of a second, confusion, and then something darker, something that looked almost like recognition. Where's your mother? He said, and it wasn't really a question. He found Patricia in the dining room, sitting very still with her coffee untouched in front of her, and something about her stillness told him everything before she said a word. Patricia. His voice was low. Did you have anything to do with this? She didn't answer. I asked you a question, Richard said, louder now, loud enough that Grace, standing frozen in the doorway, heard every word. Did you do this to her? Patricia's hands were trembling around her coffee cup, but when she finally looked up, her face had that same terrible composure Grace remembered from every hard conversation of her childhood. Yes, Patricia said. The word landed in the room like a physical blow. Grace felt her knees go weak. What? She breathed. Mom, what did you just say? Vanessa appeared in the doorway behind her, and instead of shame, there was something almost like relief on her face, like she'd been carrying a weight and was glad to finally set it down, even if it crushed someone else in the process. We did it, Vanessa said. We cancelled everything. Why? Richard demanded, his voice cracking with disbelief. Why would you do this to her? Patricia's chin lifted, and whatever restraint had kept her quiet for years finally gave out completely. Because I am tired, she said, of watching this house revolve around a daughter who was never even supposed to be mine. The room went silent in a way that felt total, like all the air had been pulled out of it at once. What do you mean? Grace said slowly, supposed to be yours. Patricia's mouth opened and then closed. She looked at Richard, and for the first time in the conversation, something like fear crossed her face, not fear of what she'd done to the wedding, but fear of what she'd just started to say. Tell me, Grace said, her voice rising, cracking in the middle. Tell me what she means, right now. Nobody moved. Richard's eyes filled with tears, and Grace watched her father, the one person in this house who had never once made her feel like an afterthought, struggle to find words for something he had clearly been carrying for a very long time. Grace, he said finally, his voice breaking, sit down. Please. There's something you need to know. He told her everything, right there in the kitchen, while her wedding day burned down around her in a different kind of fire than the one she'd imagined destroying it. He told her about the 6 years of trying, the doctors, the pain her mother carried before Grace was even born. He told her about the fertility clinic, the embryo transfer, the promise he'd made that a child raised in love would be theirs no matter where the biology came from. And a few years ago, Richard continued, his voice barely holding together, your mother did a routine genetic test, for a work insurance thing, nothing serious. It came back showing she had no biological match to you. We went back to the clinic quietly. They confirmed it, a mix-up, decades old, the kind of error that happens once in 100,000 transfers. We didn't tell you because you were already ours in every way that mattered to us. We didn't want a filing error to change how you saw yourself. Grace stared at him, then at her mother, then at Vanessa, feeling like the floor of her entire life had just been quietly removed from underneath her without warning. So my whole life, she said, her voice shaking, has been built on something you decided I didn't need to know. You are my daughter, Richard said desperately. Grace, please, nothing about that has changed, not for one single day. But Grace could barely hear him anymore. The cancelled wedding, her mother's confession, the years of quiet favoritism finally explained, and now this, the ground beneath her identity gone in a single sentence. She turned and ran, ignoring her father's voice calling after her, ignoring Vanessa's stunned silence, grabbing her car keys off the counter and driving away from the house with tears blurring the road in front of her and absolutely no destination in mind. Her phone rang over and over. She let every call go to voicemail. She drove without thinking, past Lekki, past the venue that no longer belonged to her, until she found herself parked along the water, engine off, sobbing into her hands. Across town, Daniel had been getting dressed for the happiest day of his life when his mother called, her voice tight with confusion and alarm. Daniel, I just received an email, she said. It says Grace overbilled a former client, that there's an ongoing dispute about fraudulent invoicing. Did you know about this? What are you talking about? Daniel felt his stomach twist. Send it to me. Now. The email, when it landed in his inbox, was crude in its construction but calculated in its timing, sent from an address made to look like a former client's, alleging financial misconduct on a project from over a year ago, timed to arrive hours before the ceremony. Daniel read it twice, and something in him refused to accept it at face value. Mom, I need you to trust me on this, he said. Give me an hour before you say anything to anyone. He forwarded the email to his firm's IT contact within minutes, and it took less than that hour for the truth to surface. The sender address was spoofed, crudely, from a domain registered only 3 days earlier. It was fake. All of it, fake. But by then, his phone was ringing with a different kind of emergency. His relative called, breathless. Something's happened at Grace's house. Her wedding gown, the vendors, everything's been cancelled. Nobody knows where she is. Daniel didn't wait to hear the rest. He called Grace immediately. Once. Twice. 3 times, straight to voicemail. Sitting by the water, Grace's phone rang again, and this time she looked down and saw Daniel's name. Her hand trembled over the screen for a long moment before she finally answered. Neither of them spoke at first. Then his voice came through, low and steady. Grace. Hearing it undid something in her. Daniel, she whispered. I'm sorry. Sorry for what? The wedding is ruined. The venue, the caterer, everything's gone. And my family has been lying to me my whole life. I don't even know who I am anymore. Listen to me, Daniel said, his voice firm and unshaken. Nothing has changed. Everything has changed, she said, a bitter laugh cutting through her tears. No, he said. You are still the woman I love. You're still the woman I asked to marry me. You are still Grace. Where are you? Please, tell me where you are. After a long pause, she gave him her location, and less than an hour later his car pulled up beside hers along the water. He got out and walked toward her, and the moment she saw him, whatever composure she'd been holding on to broke completely. She stepped into his arms and cried against his chest while he held her without saying a word, letting her fall apart exactly as long as she needed to. "I don't know who I am anymore," she finally managed. He lifted her chin gently so she had to look at him. "You are the same woman I fell in love with," he said. "Nothing your mother said changes that. Nothing about a lab mix-up 30 years ago changes that. You're still the kind, brilliant, strong woman I chose. You don't care that I'm not, that I was never actually theirs." "Not even a little," Daniel said. "The woman I love is standing right in front of me. That's all that has ever mattered to me." For the first time since she'd fled the house, something in Grace's chest loosened, just slightly. Then Daniel smiled, and said something she didn't expect at all. "And by the way, we are still getting married today." Grace blinked at him. "Daniel, my dress is gone. The venue is gone. There isn't enough time." "Watch me," he said. He was already dialing before she finished the sentence. He called the boutique that made her original gown, and when someone finally answered, he didn't ask, he simply stated, "My bride needs another wedding dress, today. I don't care what it costs, I'll pay double, triple, whatever it takes. Just make it happen." He called his own hotel next, rerouting the entire ceremony there, pulling in staff who owed him favors and staff who simply respected him enough to move mountains on short notice. Within hours, an impossible morning began, piece by piece, becoming a wedding again. Back at the house, Richard's grief had cuddled into something he could no longer contain. He stood in front of Patricia and Vanessa, both of them silent, neither able to meet his eyes. "I cannot believe what you've done," he said, his voice shaking. "That girl has done nothing but love this family her entire life. She calls you mother. She calls you sister. And this is how you repay her." "Dad, we are sorry," Vanessa said, tears streaming down her face. "Don't call me that right now," Richard said sharply. "Sorry is not enough. Do you understand what you took from her this morning? Not just a wedding, you took the last bit of trust she had in this family." "Felix, Richard, please," Patricia started. "No," he said, cutting her off, his voice louder than either of them had ever heard it. "I have defended Grace for years. I watched you mistreat her. I told myself it would pass, that you would come around. But today you crossed a line I cannot forgive. Leave my house." Both women froze. "What?" Patricia whispered. "You heard me. Leave." When neither of them moved, he called security, and within minutes they were escorted out, standing in the driveway with their belongings, the full weight of what they'd done finally beginning to settle over them. Vanessa cried uncontrollably. Patricia sat down on the curb, staring at nothing, the silence around her louder than anything she could have said. Hours later, in a hotel ballroom nobody could have predicted that morning, guests who had heard fragments of rumors gathered in stunned uncertainty, unsure if there would even be a ceremony to attend. Then the doors opened, and Grace walked in wearing a gown that hadn't existed 6 hours earlier, and the room fell into a hush before erupting into quiet, disbelieving applause. She looked radiant. She looked, somehow, stronger than she had that morning, not despite everything that happened, but because of how she'd walked through it. Daniel stood waiting at the front, and when their eyes met, every terrible hour of that day seemed to fall away at once. They exchanged vows in front of everyone who mattered, promising to build a life on the kind of love that didn't require blood tests or clinic paperwork to prove itself real. When they were pronounced husband and wife, the applause that filled the room felt like more than celebration, it felt like defiance, like proof that what had been built out of respect and choice could not be undone by people determined to destroy it. The story doesn't end at the altar, though. Grace carried the weight of that day for months afterward, not the sabotage, which faded quickly once its truth became clear to everyone, but the deeper wound, the quiet unraveling of who she'd believed herself to be. She spoke to a therapist. She spoke to Daniel, late at night, walking through what it meant to build an identity on something other than biology. "I used to think family meant blood," she told him one evening. "Now I think it means the people who show up when everything falls apart." Richard visited often in those months, quieter than he used to be, still carrying his own guilt for the silence he'd kept for years. Patricia and Vanessa reached out eventually, tentatively, through a mutual relative, asking only for the chance to speak. Grace agreed, cautiously, to one supervised conversation, months after the wedding, in neutral territory neither house nor hotel. "I don't expect you to forgive us," Patricia said, her voice smaller than Grace had ever heard it. "I don't think I could forgive myself in your position." "I'm not there yet," Grace said honestly. "Maybe I never will be, completely. But I don't want to spend the rest of my life carrying this the way you carried your bitterness. That cost you everything eventually. I don't want it to cost me anything more." It wasn't reconciliation, not fully. Trust, once broken that thoroughly, doesn't rebuild itself in a single conversation, or even in several. But it was a door left open instead of one slammed permanently shut, and for Grace, that felt like enough for now. She often thought back to that morning, the dead phone, the ashes of a wedding she'd built with her own hands, the sentence that unraveled everything she thought she knew about herself. And she thought, too, about the hours that followed, about a man who decided none of it changed anything, about a father who finally chose her over silence, about the version of herself who drove to the water with nowhere to go and somehow found her way back stronger than before. Family, she came to believe, was never really about the accident of biology or the paperwork of a clinic decades ago. It was about who stayed. It was about who fought to rebuild what someone else had tried to burn down. And by that definition, she had never been more certain of exactly who her family was.